The autumn wind in Buffalo, New York had a biting edge that year, a crisp, invigorating prelude to the relentless, snow-choked winter that invariably consumed the city. But on October 31st, 1993, the chill was a mere thrilling punctuation mark to the electric anticipation bubbling through the Riverside Park neighborhood. 12-year-old Sarah Miller practically vibrated with it, her small frame barely containing the boundless energy of youth. Her mother, Eleanor, a woman whose every movement spoke of quiet strength and a deep, maternal love, was meticulously putting the finishing touches on Sarah's homemade witch costume. It wasn't one of those flimsy, mass-produced outfits you found at the big department stores downtown. This was a classic, slightly spooky witch, a perfectly pointed black hat, a flowing, inky cloak that swirled dramatically, and a broom Sarah had painstakingly decorated herself with plastic spiders and shimmering glitter, purchased from the Five and Dime on Niagara Street. "Mom, can I go now? Emily's waiting by the curb. I promised I wouldn't be late." Sarah bounced on the balls of her feet, her well-worn red Converse sneakers scuffing lightly against the polished linoleum of their bright, welcoming kitchen. The comforting, sweet aroma of pumpkin pie, baking slowly in the oven, mingled pleasantly with the faint, almost nostalgic scent of Eleanor's hairspray. The warmth of the kitchen was a stark contrast to the burgeoning darkness outside, a haven of domesticity. "Hold your horses, young lady, you'll wear a hole in the floor," Eleanor chuckled, her skilled hands still adjusting the velvet ribbon of the cloak around Sarah's slender neck. "Let me just see you one last time. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Now remember the rules. You stick with Emily and Jacob like glue. No crossing Delaware Avenue, that's too busy at night. You be back by 9 o'clock sharp, and for goodness sake, don't eat all your candy at once, or you'll be up all night with a stomach ache." She straightened up, placing her hands on Sarah's shoulders, her gaze lingering, a silent wish for safety passing between them. David Miller, Sarah's father, walked in from the garage, wiping his grease-stained hands with a faded blue rag. He owned a small, independent auto repair shop on Hurdle Avenue, a no-frills establishment known for its honest work and fair prices. It was a business that had kept them comfortably afloat, allowing Eleanor to work part-time at the local library and giving Sarah the kind of stable, secure upbringing that many in Buffalo aspired to. He ruffled Sarah's dark, shoulder-length hair, a gesture of familiar affection. "Look at my little sorceress. You're going to scare all those grown-ups into giving you extra chocolate bars tonight, I just know it." Sarah giggled, a bright, clear sound that filled the kitchen, hugging her dad briefly, her arms surprisingly strong for her age. "Bye, Dad. Bye, Mom. Love you both so much." She was a whirlwind of black fabric and youthful exuberance, out the door before they could even fully respond, the screen door slapping shut behind her with a sharp, resonant sound that would, in the years to come, echo with an unbearable, chilling finality in their memories. Outside, the street was already a vibrant, joyous carnival of costumed children. The air was thick with the energy of anticipation and the promise of sugary treats. Emily, Sarah's best friend since kindergarten, a gap-toothed fairy flitting around in a shimmering, slightly too small costume, and Jacob, Emily's older brother, a perpetually moody 14-year-old disguised as a remarkably unenthusiastic zombie, were waiting patiently by the curb. Their plan was the traditional, well-trodden route, heading down Riverside Avenue, a street renowned for its grand, if slightly weathered, Victorian and craftsman homes, whose porch lights glowed invitingly. The air was alive with the delightful symphony of laughter, the rustle of cheap plastic capes, and the repetitive, joyous cries of trick or treat. It was the quintessential American Halloween. Sarah, Emily, and Jacob worked their way through their usual, well-honed trick-or-treating circuit. Mrs. Henderson, a kindly elderly woman at the corner of Ontario Street, was legendary for always doling out full-sized candy bars, a true Halloween hero. Mr. Kowalski, the gruff but secretly soft-hearted Polish butcher from down the block, would surprise them with shiny quarters, a small fortune in the eyes of a 12-year-old. It was a ritual, a comforting certainty woven into the fabric of their lives, in a world that, for these children, felt largely predictable, safe, and utterly enchanting. Around 8:15 p.m., as their candy bags grew delightfully heavy with their sugary loot, Jacob, ever the pragmatic and easily bored older brother, declared he was officially done. "All right, that's it for me. My feet are killing me and I've got enough sugar to last me till Christmas. I'm heading back to Emily's place." Emily whined, her fairy wings drooping dramatically. "But Jacob, no, we haven't hit Regent Street yet. Mrs. Davison gives out homemade caramel apples, remember, they're the best." Her voice was a childish plea, laced with the potent allure of gooey, sweet treats. Sarah, too, was eager for the legendary caramel apples, her eyes wide with a shared culinary ambition. "Come on, Jacob, just a few more houses, please." Jacob, already turning away, waved a dismissive hand, clearly intent on his sugar-induced retreat. "You guys go ahead. I'll meet you back at my place in 20 minutes, okay? Don't be late or my mom will be mad." He lumbered off, his zombie grunts fading into the general Halloween din. It was a small, almost imperceptible deviation, a split in the innocent, predictable path of childhood. Sarah and Emily, buoyed by the irresistible prospect of sticky, sweet treats, turned onto Regent Street. This street was noticeably darker, the houses a bit more spaced out, the welcoming glow of porch lights slightly more sparse. They easily found Mrs. Davison's house, secured their coveted apples, and giggled as they walked, already making plans for which classic horror movie they'd rent from Blockbuster later that night, perhaps Hocus Pocus or The Nightmare Before Christmas. Then Emily stopped abruptly, pulling on Sarah's cloak sleeve, her face a mask of sudden dismay. "Oh shoot, I left my good trick-or-treat bag at Mrs. Davison's. The one Aunt Carol gave me. It has my name embroidered on it." Her voice was tinged with genuine panic. Sarah, ever the loyal and understanding friend, nodded without hesitation. "Go get it. I'll just wait right here by this big old oak tree. It's too dark to go alone anyway. Don't be long, okay?" She leaned against the rough, ancient bark of the oak, its branches skeletal against the moonlit sky, humming a cheerful Halloween tune, occasionally checking her glow-in-the-dark watch. The air grew perceptibly colder, the last few straggling trick-or-treaters now just distant echoes. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Where was Emily? A flicker of unease, faint at first, then sharper, began to gnaw at Sarah. She straightened up, peering down the street, straining her eyes against the encroaching darkness. Nothing. Just the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the pavement and the distant, mournful wail of a police siren, a sound so common in any city, but which suddenly felt profoundly ominous, a harbinger of something unknown. She decided to walk back towards Mrs. Davison's, her footsteps quickening. The houses on Regent Street now seemed larger, more imposing, their shadows stretching like grasping fingers. A porch light flickered off, plunging a section of the street into deeper gloom. The joyous carnival atmosphere of earlier had utterly vanished, replaced by the quiet hum of a neighborhood settling down for the night, a profound, unsettling silence. She walked faster, calling Emily's name softly at first, then louder, her voice echoing, thin and reedy in the sudden stillness. There was no answer. She reached Mrs. Davison's house, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but Emily wasn't there. Mrs. Davison, a kindly elderly woman with spectacles perched on her nose, hadn't seen Emily return for her bag. A chill, far colder and more penetrating than the autumn air, gripped Sarah. Her heart hammered wildly. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at her throat, a desperate, rising tide. She was alone, and Emily was gone. Back at the Miller home, the antique oak clock on the kitchen wall ticked past 9, then 9:15, then 9:30. Elinor's initial concern had ripened into a cold dread. She began to pace, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes darting towards the front door. David, trying to maintain a semblance of calm for his wife, called Emily's house. Jacob answered, his voice thick with sleep and confusion. "Emily's not here. I thought she was with Sarah. They said they were going to Regent Street for caramel apples." The phone call spiraled into a frantic, increasingly desperate series of exchanges. Emily's parents, the Davisons, other neighbors, anyone who might have seen them. No one had seen Sarah or Emily since they split from Jacob. The sense of foreboding solidified in Elinor's stomach, a cold, hard knot of fear that grew with every unanswered question. By 10 o'clock, David, his face pale and drawn, was on the phone with the Buffalo Police Department. Detective Robert Maxwell, a man with prematurely tired eyes and a mind meticulously trained in methodical investigation, took the call. He was used to missing kids on Halloween, kids who had pushed their boundaries, kids who had wandered off, kids who were testing their parents' patience. But something in David Miller's voice, a raw, primal edge of terror, told Maxwell this was not a typical runoff case. This was different. Within the hour, the quiet residential street of Riverside Avenue was awash in the flashing red and blue of police lights. The Millers' cozy home, usually a beacon of warmth, was now bathed in an unsettling, pulsing glow. The neighborhood, typically hushed by this late hour, was stirring awake, drawn by the commotion. Neighbors emerged from their houses, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and growing concern, wrapping their bathrobes tighter against the deepening cold. Elena and David stood on their porch, huddled together, their arms wrapped around each other, watching the search party materialize, a surreal, nightmarish tableau unfolding before their eyes. Detective Maxwell, his presence calm but authoritative, led the initial search efforts. Every house on Regent Street was canvassed, its occupants roused from sleep. Every overgrown bush, every narrow alleyway, every shadow-draped parked car was meticulously checked, flashlights cutting through the inky blackness. By midnight, Emily was finally found, distraught and crying hysterically, huddled and shaking in the dense bushes a block away from Mrs. Davison's. She'd gotten scared when Sarah hadn't waited for her, panicked by the sudden solitude, and had instinctively run home a different, more familiar route, terrified of getting in trouble. She was safe, albeit traumatized, but Sarah was gone. The news hit Buffalo with the force of a physical blow, a collective gasp of disbelief and horror, a missing child, on Halloween night. The story dominated local news channels and newspaper headlines for days, pushing all other stories aside. Search parties, composed of weary but determined volunteers, police officers, and firefighters, scoured the Riverside Park and Black Rock neighborhoods, their calls of Sarah echoing into the empty air. The treacherous, fast-moving currents of the Niagara River which bordered the area were dragged, adding another layer of grim possibility. Flyers with Sarah's smiling, innocent face, a school picture, her dark hair neatly parted, her bright eyes full of life appeared on every lamppost, every storefront window, every community board. Her face became a silent plea, a haunting question mark against the backdrop of a grieving city. Detective Maxwell worked tirelessly, his hours blurring into a relentless grind. He interviewed Emily repeatedly, his questions gentle but persistent, meticulously piecing together her fragmented account. Emily's story remained agonizingly consistent. Sarah was waiting by the oak tree. Emily went back for her bag. When she returned, Sarah was gone. Mrs. Davison corroborated Emily's return and her subsequent distress, but had seen nothing else. No one saw anything suspicious, no strange cars lingering, no unusual people, just the sudden, inexplicable void where Sarah had been, the investigation bogged down in its own painstaking thoroughness. Every lead, however flimsy or tangential, was chased with a desperate hope. A white van seen in the area, dozens of similar vehicles were located, their owners questioned and ultimately cleared. A man acting strangely near the park. Identified, questioned, and found to be an eccentric birdwatcher. The cold Buffalo November winds picked up, whistling through the bare branches of the oak trees, stripping them clean of their leaves, mirroring the rapidly diminishing hope in the millers' hearts. Snow began to fall, blanketing the city in a deceptive, pristine white, making further outdoor searches nearly impossible. Elena and David became spectral figures in their own home. Elena, a woman once so full of life, moved through her days with a quiet, heartbreaking despair, meticulously cleaning Sarah's room every single day, as if preparing for her imminent, miraculous return. David, usually robust and cheerful, became gaunt, his shoulders perpetually stooped under the crushing weight of unspoken blame and overwhelming grief. Their marriage, once a strong, vibrant partnership, buckled and creaked under the immense, intolerable pressure, strained by the silent accusations, the shared nightmares, and the profound, aching emptiness that now permeated their lives. Every doorbell ring, every phone call was a spike of agonizing hope, only to be quickly, brutally extinguished. Weeks turned into months, months inexorably bled into a year. The flyers, once bright and hopeful, faded, torn by the relentless wind and rain, curling at the edges, their message becoming harder to discern. The local news cycle, ever hungry for fresh stories, moved on. The missing Sarah Miller segment on local TV became less frequent, then disappeared altogether, a heartbreaking testament to the world's forgetfulness. Detective Maxwell kept a file, thick and heavy, on his desk in the cold case unit, a physical representation of his personal failure. He reviewed it every few weeks, hoping a new pair of eyes, even his own, would finally discern the crucial detail, the missed clue, the overlooked piece of the puzzle. But there was nothing, no ransom note, no body, no credible witness. No trace. Sarah Miller had simply vanished into the Buffalo night, a ghost conjured by fear and sorrow. The case went cold, relegated to the dusty archives of Unsolved Mysteries, a file gathering dust, but never truly forgotten by those whose lives it had shattered. 2003, 10 years later, 10 years, a decade. It felt simultaneously like an eternity and like the blink of an eye. The calendar now read 2003. The world had undergone a seismic shift in that time. Cell phones, once a luxury, were now ubiquitous, clamped to nearly every ear. The internet, a nascent curiosity in 1993, had exploded into a daily necessity, fundamentally altering communication and information. George W. Bush was settling into his second term in the White House. The chilling specter of global terrorism had replaced the lingering anxieties of the Cold War. But in Buffalo, the bitter chill of that Halloween night in 1993 still lingered, a pervasive, emotional frost, particularly for Elainer and David Miller. They still inhabited the same house on Riverside Avenue, now a quiet, almost mournful monument to their enduring, unshakable grief. Sarah's room remained untouched, a pristine, heartbreaking shrine to a childhood abruptly stolen. Her bed was meticulously made, her worn stuffed animals arranged just so on the pillow, her school books still neatly stacked on the desk, waiting for a return that never came. Elainer had aged beyond her years, her once vibrant, intelligent eyes now perpetually shadowed, her smile a rare, fleeting ghost. David had reluctantly closed his auto shop a few years back, unable to maintain the relentless cheerfulness and pragmatic focus required of a small business owner. He now worked part-time at a large hardware store on Sheridan Drive, his days marked by the quiet, almost meditative repetition of stocking shelves, his thoughts often drifting back to the workbench he had shared with Sarah. Their marriage, though battered and bruised, had somehow endured, but it was a quiet, almost somber partnership, bound inextricably by their shared sorrow, a silent understanding of an irreparable wound. Detective Robert Maxwell was no longer the sharp, mid-career officer who had taken David Miller's frantic call. He was older now, his thick hair streaked with more gray than brown, his face etched with deeper lines of accumulated experience, regret, and profound fatigue. He was still with the Buffalo PD, having moved to the Cold Case Unit 5 years prior, a place where forgotten tragedies sometimes found a flicker of renewed hope. Sarah Miller's file was one of his most frequently revisited, its pages worn thin from countless readings. It haunted him, a perpetual phantom in his professional conscience. The indelible image of Elainer's tear-streaked face, David's stoic, heartbreaking despair, they were seared into his memory, a constant reminder of the failure he carried. One dreary, overcast November afternoon in 2003, Maxwell was engaged in the tedious, often unrewarding task of sifting through an old box of physical evidence from an unrelated arson case dating back to 1998, which had only recently been digitally scanned and uploaded into the department's nascent computerized database. It was monotonous work, cross-referencing old, handwritten reports with new digital entries, searching for any tangential connections, any overlooked detail that just might spark a new direction, a glimmer of light in the archival darkness. He pulled out a brittle, transparent evidence bag, its plastic yellowed with age, labeled with a faded, almost illegible marker. Inside, nestled among a collection of charred fabric scraps, rusty tools, and other detritus, was a small, crudely made wooden carving of a bird. It was painted a bright, almost childish red, with small, unevenly glued plastic googly eyes that gave it a strangely endearing, slightly comical appearance. It undeniably looked like a child's craft project, perhaps from an elementary school art class. It had been logged, photographed, and largely forgotten during the original arson investigation, deemed entirely irrelevant to the case of a deliberately set warehouse fire. Maxwell, almost out of sheer habit and a desire to move on to the next item, put it back into the box. But something about it, a subtle, almost subconscious detail, tugged at him. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. The red paint was chipping in places, revealing the pale wood beneath, and the grain felt rough under his thumb. He turned it over again, feeling its light weight. On the bottom, etched faintly, almost imperceptibly into the unpainted wood, were the unmistakable initials. SM. He felt a sudden visceral jolt, a sharp spike of adrenaline that cut through his weariness. SM. Sarah Miller, could it be? It was an impossibly long shot, he told himself, a desperate leap of logic. Countless children had those initials. Countless kids made wooden birds in art class. But the location, the old First Ward where the derelict warehouse stood, was a world away, miles from the leafy, residential streets of Riverside Park. Why would Sarah's craft project be found there, 5 years after the arson, and a full 10 years after she had vanished without a trace? Maxwell, his heart now thrumming with a rekindled, cautious hope, dug deeper into the original arson file, pulling up all associated documents. The warehouse fire had been deliberately set, but the perpetrator was never definitively identified or caught. The site itself was notorious, known for being a transient camp, a temporary refuge for squatters, drifters, and occasional petty criminals, a place where lives drifted in and out of sight. Nothing about its grim history screamed missing child case. Yet the bird he cross-referenced the bird's description with the voluminous Sarah Miller file. The file was a testament to the thoroughness of the initial investigation, filled with everything from dental records and school photos to a detailed list of Sarah's favorite books and hobbies, a desperate attempt to capture the essence of the lost girl. Among the personal effects listed, there was a brief, almost offhand mention from Eleanor Miller during one of her initial, tearful interviews. Sarah loved to do crafts. She made a small wooden bird in art class a few weeks before Halloween, painted it red, said it was for me, but she hadn't given it to me yet, she was going to surprise me. The description was admittedly vague, a fleeting memory from a mother's fractured mind, but the specific details, the red paint, the wooden bird, the initials matching Sarah's own, they were too coincidental to ignore. It was enough. Maxwell felt a familiar, chilling certainty settle over him, a cold knot of dread mixed with professional exhilaration. This was a thread, a very, very thin thread, perhaps barely visible, but a thread nonetheless, leading into the darkness. He located the original evidence officer from the 1998 arson case, a man named Sergeant Miller, no relation, who had retired 2 years prior and was now living a quiet life in Florida. The retired officer, after some prompting, remembered the warehouse fire, the transient camp, the general squalor. He recalled finding the various personal items, dismissing most of them as junk left behind by squatters. He couldn't offer any more specifics about the wooden bird, other than confirming its original location. Maxwell then meticulously revisited the original 1993 Sarah Miller case notes, scrutinizing every page, every interview transcript. He specifically focused on any mention of the old First Ward, any connections, however remote, to that part of the city. Nothing. Sarah's world had been the leafy, family-friendly streets of Riverside Park, her elementary school, her circle of friends, and the familiar rhythm of family life. The old First Ward, with its abandoned factories, crumbling brick buildings, and forgotten docks along the Buffalo River, was a different universe entirely, a grittier, harsher, more industrial part of the city she would have had no reason to visit. He decided, with a heavy heart, that he needed to visit Eleanor and David Miller again. It was a visit he dreaded more than almost any other professional duty, knowing the fresh wave of hope, and inevitably, the crushing pain it would ignite in their already fragile lives. They greeted him at their door with the same somber politeness they always did, their faces a living roadmap of their enduring sorrow. He laid the small, red wooden bird gently on their worn coffee table, watching their reactions closely. Eleanor gasped a sharp, choked sound, her hand flying instinctively to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the small object. David leaned forward slowly, his eyes widening in disbelief, then narrowing with a sudden, painful recognition. Where did you find this, detective?" Eleanor whispered, tears already beginning to well in her eyes, tracing silent paths down her deeply lined cheeks. "It was found in 1998, Mrs. Miller, at an old, abandoned warehouse in the old First Ward. We're just looking at some old evidence again, cross-referencing cases." Maxwell kept his voice deliberately calm, measured. Eleanor picked up the bird, her trembling fingers gently tracing the faint SM etched on the bottom. She held it as if it were the most precious, delicate thing in the world, a direct conduit to her lost daughter. "It's hers," she choked out, her voice barely audible, thick with emotion. "It's absolutely hers. She made it for me. She was so proud of it, she wanted it to be perfect before she gave it to me." The confirmation, while agonizing, was also galvanizing. This wasn't just a randomly found craft project. This was Sarah. A tangible, undeniable link. Maxwell returned to the warehouse site in the old First Ward. 10 years later, it was even more derelict, a crumbling shell of its former self, now officially slated for demolition to make way for a new development project. He walked the perimeter, his mind's eye reconstructing the 1998 fire, the transient encampments, the fleeting, forgotten lives that had passed through its decaying walls. If the bird was found here, it meant Sarah, or something of Sarah's, had been here. But how, and when, and what did it mean for her ultimate fate? He widened his search, expanding his focus to any known transients, day laborers, or individuals with a history of vagrancy who might have frequented both Riverside Park and the old First Ward in the mid to late 1990s. The leads were frustratingly scarce. Records for transient populations in the 90s were fragmented, often incomplete, or entirely non-existent, making accurate tracking a nightmarish task. Yet one name, a faint whisper in the margins of old police reports from the late 90s, concerning minor theft and vagrancy in the old First Ward, kept resurfacing. A man named Artie Jenkins. He was known to have worked odd jobs, sometimes in construction, sometimes as a day laborer, disappearing for months at a time. He had a reputation for being quiet, withdrawn, almost shy, but occasionally prone to fits of paranoia, especially when confronted. He also, Maxwell discovered through a tedious search of old phone books and property records, had a distant cousin who had lived on the very edge of the Riverside Park neighborhood in 1993. A very distant, almost inconsequential connection, but a connection nonetheless. Artie Jenkins. The name meant absolutely nothing in the vast, dusty binders of the 1993 Sarah Miller file. He'd never been interviewed. He wasn't a registered sex offender, nor did he have any violent criminal history. He was just a ghost, an anonymous face in the margins of society, seemingly unconnected to Sarah Miller's vibrant world. Maxwell located an old mugshot of Artie Jenkins from a 1997 arrest for shoplifting. A gaunt face stared back at him, hollowed cheeks, shifty, evasive eyes, and a thin, scraggly mustache. He started asking around, contacting retired officers who had worked the old First Ward beat, social workers who had dealt with the homeless population, anyone who might remember the man. He learned that Artie Jenkins had completely vanished sometime in late 2000, just disappeared. Another ghost, a man who had lived his life on the fringes, now seemingly erased from existence. The bird, the warehouse, Artie Jenkins. The disparate pieces were slowly, inexorably beginning to connect, forming a dark, profoundly unsettling image in Maxwell's mind. If Artie Jenkins had the bird, how did he get it? Had he innocently found it? Or had he, in a scenario too horrifying to fully contemplate, taken it from Sarah? And if so, what unspeakable fate had befallen her? Maxwell painstakingly reconstructed Artie Jenkins's known movements in the years following 1993, using fragments of police reports, hospital admissions for minor injuries, and welfare records. He learned that Jenkins had indeed done some day labor work in the Riverside Park area in the mid-90s, specifically around 1994-1995, helping with minor renovations on some rental properties near the park. It wasn't definitive proof of a direct connection to Sarah, but it undeniably placed him in the general vicinity, a chilling geographical overlap. He tracked down Jenkins's distant cousin, the woman who had lived near Riverside Park, a quiet, elderly woman named Martha now residing in Tonawanda, just north of Buffalo. She remembered Artie. He was always a bit off, she said, her voice hesitant, tinged with a mix of pity and discomfort. Never really fit in with anyone, kept to himself. Used to tell stories sometimes when he'd stop by about finding things. Treasures, he called them. Little trinkets and such, things other people had lost or thrown away. Maxwell leaned forward, his voice carefully controlled, pushing gently. Did he ever mention a little wooden bird, red paint, googly eyes? Martha paused, her brow furrowing in concentration, her gaze distant as she dredged up old memories. A bird, I do remember something like that. Yes, he had it with him, tucked away in his coat pocket sometimes. Said he found it, thought it was lucky, a charm against his bad luck. This was, I think, around 95, maybe 96. He was always carrying it around, seemed very attached to it. The timeline fit with agonizing precision. Artie Jenkins had the bird, and he was known to have been in Riverside Park. But how did Sarah's distinctive wooden bird get from her person on Halloween night 1993, a night when she was wearing a cloak with no pockets, to Artie Jenkins's possession in 1995 or 1996? And then ultimately to a derelict warehouse in the old First Ward by 1998, where it lay forgotten until now. Maxwell considered the grim possibilities, each one more heartbreaking and terrifying than the last. Had Artie Jenkins been the one to take Sarah? Had he, a quiet, forgotten man existing on the fringes of society, somehow lured her, or snatched her, from that dark street on that chaotic Halloween night? And if so, what unspeakable fate had befallen her? The new lead, while undeniably significant and a breakthrough after a decade of agonizing silence, brought a fresh deluge of questions rather than answers. Artie Jenkins was still a phantom, his current whereabouts unknown. No body had ever been found to offer definitive proof. No confession existed to provide closure. Just a small, red wooden bird, a tangible, heartbreaking link to a vibrant girl swallowed by the dark, and a decade of agonizing, unanswerable silence. Maxwell shared the devastating findings with Alina and David. The initial wave of renewed hope, the cruelest and most dangerous emotion for grieving parents, slowly, agonizingly, gave way to a renewed, deeper, almost unbearable uncertainty. The bird was undeniably a piece of Sarah, a fragment of her essence, but it didn't tell them where she was or what horrific events had transpired. It only confirmed that somewhere in the dark, forgotten shadows of their city, a piece of her story had continued, twisting and turning without them, clutched in the hands of a stranger. The investigation into Artie Jenkins intensified once more, becoming a renewed, desperate manhunt, but without a body, without a definitive witness, and with the man himself vanished, it remained frustratingly stalled. Police circulated old photos of Jenkins across multiple states, hoping someone somewhere would recognize him, would offer the one crucial piece of information. The haunting story of the small wooden bird made local news again, briefly reviving national interest in Sarah Miller's cold case, but just as quickly the fleeting attention faded, overshadowed by newer, more immediate tragedies. The truth about Sarah Miller's disappearance remained elusive, hidden away in the forgotten, grimy corners of Buffalo's history, whispered in the rustling leaves of countless autumns, and carried on the quiet, indifferent currents of the Niagara River. The small red wooden bird, now carefully preserved as a chilling, heartbreaking piece of evidence, became an enduring symbol of a vibrant life cut tragically short, a profound mystery left agonizingly unsolved, and a family forever marked by the indelible, torturous question. What happened to Sarah? The "this" of the title wasn't a resolution, but a chilling, heartbreaking confirmation that sometimes the answers only serve to deepen the despair, revealing just enough to torment, but never enough to truly heal. The Millers were left with a fragile, almost unbearable new layer of understanding, a tangible fragment of their daughter's last days, clutched in the phantom hands of a man who had seemingly evaporated into thin air. Their agonizing journey for truth, a decade later, had led them not to the solace of closure, but to the cold, hard reality of an enduring, terrifying unknown. The city of Buffalo, beautiful and resilient, also held its dark secrets, forever entwined with the haunting legend of the girl who vanished on Halloween night.